And welcome back, everybody, to the Shoop and Tion Football Extravaganza. Once again, I'm your host, Shoop, back with another division preview. This is actually our final division preview. You caught our NFC North preview on Monday, and we've hit all the divisions, so we got one more to go, and it's another very competitive division. The division that represented one of the Super Bowl participants last year. So it should be a lot of fun to talk about. But first, let me whip it over to Tion. How are you doing today? How's it going?
I'm doing well. I can't believe we're already at the end. I know there's only 8, but this has been quite a journey previewing all these teams, and it was good. I think I mentioned it like early on. It's good that we were doing this because like it gets me involved in what's going on in the league, and we are literally about just about a week away from the first game, and so it's very exciting. And we're finishing up, I think, aptly with a division that is probably going to be like one of, if not the most fun in the entire league, and a lot of really great storylines. Like you said, just had the Super Bowl losers in this division, the 49ers, and some other really, really great teams in the Rams, Seahawks, and Cardinals. And so I'm ready to get into it, and I'm looking forward to the beginning of the season.
Absolutely. Part of the reason, well, besides it being like kind of like alphabetical order, but part of the reason why the NFC West was last was because a couple of guys on the team that we're about to talk about, the 49ers, we didn't really know what their status was going to be for the upcoming season. Well, we waited all the way until August 28th, and we still don't.
And we still don't.
So we're just going to go in here anyway, and we're going to talk about last year's NFC rep in the Super Bowl, the San Francisco 49ers. The 49ers have been a beacon of success ever since Kyle Shanahan arrived into town with John Lynch pairing as the GM. They've done an absolutely tremendous job of building this roster. Things started with that dominant D line that they put together a few years ago. And while they might not have the same exact pieces in place, they've been able to rotate pieces and keep that defense as like the main structure of this team. But they've managed to basically be elite at almost every area on the football field. But things start with the quarterback position, and no position is more fascinating on this 49ers team than the quarterback position. Because a couple of years ago, the 49ers traded up for Trey Lance. So they gave up multiple big assets, multiple first round picks, the big ones, of course, multiple assets to move up, mortgage their future for Trey Lance. And it was a complete disaster because Trey Lance only started a couple games, two games exact, before he broke his leg, was out for the year, and then we come to find out that he was never any good anyway. But enter into the fold, would you believe it or not, the last pick of the draft, Brock Purdy, comes in a year and a half ago, immediately takes the reins over as a starter, sees the job from Jimmy G, and really hasn't looked back since. So take me through kind of what you've seen from Brock Purdy in his young career, and let me know if you think that he can be a star in this league.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I kind of think he's already proven it a little bit. And I know it's very interesting because, like, he is such a divisive figure in the NFL because so many people believe, one, that he's not that great, and two, that he is a product of the system that Kyle Shanahan has built and a product of all the great players around him. I think it's the question of, like, is he great because of those great players, or is he great along with those great players? And I think the second one is much more truthful, right? I think he is a fantastic quarterback, and I think he has done well in that system. And, very clearly they trust him. They now are moving on with him as the future at quarterback, or at least in the immediate future. Like, he is the guy that they are going to try to win a Super Bowl with. And so while I think the questions of, like, is he elite, is he in that upper echelon of quarterback, are going to remain, he is absolutely a solid quarterback in this league. And when you combine that with the amazing talent that they have on the offensive side, you get one of the best offenses and one of the best teams in the league.
Yeah, I think ever since day one, and by day one, I mean like the first time he stepped onto the field a couple of years ago against the Dolphins, he has shown that he can be a great starting quarterback. I mean, he was making tough throws under pressure, and more than anything, Purdy doesn't make a ton of mistakes. Purdy kind of uses Kyle Shanahan's system to perfection. He's got McCaffrey, he's got an electric running back that he can, dump the ball off to and make great plays, but he can also throw the ball downfield. And he's got a plethora of weapons to do it. We mentioned McCaffrey, who is the best running back in the NFL, no debate. He can do it all. He can run up the gut, run outside, catch passes. He's a great receiver. McCaffrey can do it all. He's a huge part of this offense and really changed this team when he was acquired a couple seasons ago. And then you have their receiving core. So you got Deebo Samuel, who was drafted in 2019 or 2020, one of those years, I believe. But he's done it all too. He's a great receiver, but he's also like a great speed threat. He's great on end arounds. He's had some rushing touchdowns. He's very dynamic and diverse in this offense, and he does get hurt often, time to time, and the offense definitely takes a dip when he's out. Of course, the man himself, George Kittle, great blocking tight end, great receiving tight end, jackknife of all trades, and just a fun guy to watch. And there's a fourth guy that we didn't mention is Brandon Knight, who he's had a great start. He especially broke out last year. Like he showed that he can live up to that first round talent. Now, Ayuk has been at a standstill in contract talks because he wants to be paid like one of the top wideouts in the league. So I think this is a very interesting debate. Because of the talent that they already have with all these offensive playmakers, and keeping in mind what Ayuk has brought to the table, the talent that he's shown, how imperative is it that the 49ers meet exactly what Ayuk wants?
Well, it's interesting because on the one hand, you sit there and say, hey, you're trying to win a Super Bowl, right? You should keep all your guys in the building. And I think that's really logical. And I think it's logical to say, okay, yeah, so we're going to put all the money we can on the table right now while we're paying our quarterback, the most important position in the league, literally next to nothing. I mean, he's I think the 55th highest paid quarterback in the league or something like that. And so I think that's one part of the argument. The other part is that you mentioned all the other great names, and you sit there and say, well, we also drafted Ricky Pearsall, and we're going to talk about the off-season acquisitions for this team, coming up. But they drafted this guy in the first round, another first-round wide receiver, and they also have Juwan Jennings, who has proven himself to be a pretty solid number 3 wide receiver. And then you kind of start to look and say, okay, well, what's happening? Like, do they actually want Ayuk on this team? Obviously, I think they could really use him. I think he's a phenomenal player. But I think they have a very distinct price that they value him at. And I think he believes he's going to get that elsewhere. And, you said at the top, we kind of delayed this to see what happens with him. And then the other guy, the big one on the offensive line, Trent Williams, I actually think is more important. But for both of those guys, nothing has really moved where, obviously their game is that Monday night. So it's a little further out. But it doesn't seem like there's been many updates this week. And so very big question mark as to whether or not they will be there for week 1.
Yeah, week 1 is definitely in question. I think long term, though, that Ayuk ends up staying with the 49ers. Now, the thing is with the new collective bargaining agreement, it's more team friendly because of the fines that players get when they miss these important timelines like training camp and games. So I think Ayuk folds eventually, and he's got to come to terms like, do you want to get paid or do you want to win? Because if you want to win, this is your best opportunity right now. And he's got to realize that.
Right.
But I don't fault the guy for trying to get his money. Just like, the guy you mentioned, Trent Williams, he's trying to get some guarantees. Now, Trent Williams is an older guy, but he's still playing at the highest level. And it might not even be a debate. Williams has way more leverage because of how important Williams is to this team.
Oh, yeah.
The rest of this offensive line, like a lot of young guys, not a ton of talent. if Williams goes down, like tell me, like I mean, you can make a case that Williams might be the most important player on any team that's not a quarterback in the NFL.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right. And, like you said, he has a lot more leverage. And to be honest with you, I'm surprised he hasn't signed. I really expected them to say, hey, like you said, he's toward the end of his career, right? Like, he probably has like 2 or 3 more years left. But I was surprised that the 49ers haven't said, like, yes, we will acquiesce to your demands. Yes, we need you back. Because you're right. The rest of the offensive line is not that great. And we saw it last year. The 49ers started 5-0 last year. Trent Williams goes down. He misses 3 games. They lose those next 3 games. And really, the guy we just talked about, Brock Purdy, yes, you can talk about all the weapons, but when that offensive line was not as good and when they did not have Trent Williams, Brock Purdy looked like a shell of what he has looked like in the league. And so I'm very, out of all these things, Ayuk and Williams and all the draft picks, Ayuk, I understand not wanting to give him a ton of money because you sit there and say we have all these other guys, and I don't know if he's worth that kind of top money. Trent Williams, I'm shocked that he has not been signed, given how important he is to the 49ers.
Yep, and Williams no stranger to trying to get what he wants. I mean, he held out an entire season with Washington for other reasons, but still, Williams knows what he's worth, and he should. He's very important to that team, and I agree with you that that's way more important than the Ayuk holdout for the 49ers, and they got to get him playing week 1 against the Jets. Moving on to that defense, because that defense has been a staple of this team. You got the key pieces like Fred Warner and Nick Bosa, the 2 mainstays, 2 studs on that defense, but there's been a lot of departures and a lot of new faces to this defense. So kind of take us through, what the 49ers did this offseason, who they let go of and who they brought in, and whether it's going to be a net negative or a net positive for them.
It's interesting. I would say, just as a blanket statement, that it is probably going to be a little bit of a net negative, just based on who they let go of. When you have a team that is as good as the 49ers, and when you have all the pieces that they have, all the elite players, right? You're not going to lose those elite players. We just talked about those 2 guys, but they haven't lost them yet. And so on defense, they lost a lot of their depth, right? So they lost Randy Gregory. They lost Chase Young. They lost Sebastian Joseph Day, Clelin Ferrell. These guys on the defensive line that were brought in, last year and throughout the last couple of years to be that sort of depth pass rush beyond Bosa. And so this offseason, they combated by getting a few more depth guys, right? Leonard Floyd, who's a pass rusher that has been around the league. He has shown himself to be a pretty darn good edge rusher in the league. Yetur Gross-Matos, Jordan Elliott from the Browns, right? These guys were brought in to really bring back that depth on the defensive line. They also brought in Rock Ya-Sin at cornerback to help improve the secondary. And so, like you said, when the 49ers really entered this Shanahan era, it was the defense under Robert Saleh that was this beast of a unit and was one of the best units in the league. Sitting the 49ers, while I do think the defense is going to take a little bit of a step back, I think they did a pretty decent job of getting those depth pieces back for that unit this year.
Yeah, they let go of a lot of D-line. They brought in some new D-linemen, and Malik Collins is a guy that I think can do an excellent job of fulfilling the hole that Eric Armstead left behind. Leonard Floyd will do a much better job than what Chase Young was supposed to do, being a bookend for Nick Bosa. I do worry about the depth, and there's a lot of young guys to the point where, there's a lot of pressure on these studs for this team to step up and play at their highest level. Because if any of them take a step back, then we could see some regression with this defense. I mean, I'm looking at that linebacker spot where you've got, you got Fred Warner, but beyond that, Dre Greenlaw, he's great, but he's coming off a major injury.
But he's hurt.
He's hurt. Demetrius Flannigan-Fowles is the other projected starting linebacker, and you don't really know what to expect from him. I believe Oren Burks was the guy that replaced. Was he the guy that replaced Greenlaw in the Super Bowl last year, or was that Flannigan-Fowles?
Yes,
So it was Burks.
that was Burks.
Yeah, Burks is gone. But you kind of saw how in the Super Bowl the defense changed when Greenlaw was out. And then that second corner spot, Diamador Lenore, he's been there for a couple seasons now, but he's still not very good. And the fact that he's still like their second guy, they brought like Isaac Yiadom in the offseason, but he's like not much better. He hasn't won the starting job. So the second corner is a weakness, and there's nothing you can do because they have so many guys to pay that they can't fulfill that. So I do worry about those young guys. But overall, still, from top to bottom, this roster is absolutely stacked, and there's no reason that this team can't compete at the highest level for another season.
Agree.
So let's move on to a different team. We'll address the Niners again in our predictions. Let's go with the Los Angeles Rams, the most recent team to win a Super Bowl in this division. It all changed when Matthew Stafford was brought over to this team. They had a magical year that first year that they won the Super Bowl. A little trouble getting back to that level. Now, they made the playoffs last year after a season which they did not. But came up short in the wild card game. And now they're going to have to move on without their cornerstone of the franchise, Aaron Donald. How much is Donald's loss? As much as they can prepare for it, like how much is his loss going to hurt this team?
Yeah, it's funny. As I was preparing for this episode, I was like almost reminded of it. I was like, oh, that's right. Like Aaron Donald, like they don't have him, and it feels so weird that no one really talked about that this offseason. I feel like, I mean, arguably the best defensive player in the league, certainly the best defensive player in the last decade, is no longer on this team, and everyone I feel like has kind of ignored it. Like, I think it is a huge story for the Rams, and while I like some of the additions that they made on the defensive side heading into this next year, they also won't have their defensive coordinator from last year, right? Raheem Morris is now in Atlanta with the Falcons, and so losing out on both of those guys. But in particular, Aaron Donald, that is a huge pass rushing threat, and they're going to have to basically rethink what they do on defense. Now, if anyone's going to be able to do that, if anyone's going to be able to replace a guy like Aaron Donald, it is the guy in Sean McVay who, even heading into last season, looking at that roster, you didn't think it was that great, and they had guys step up all over the place. And so I do think missing out on that elite talent is going to be big, particularly early on in the season, and we might see that their pass rush is going to really struggle without Aaron Donald, and the teams in their division and the teams that they play in general are going to breathe a sigh of relief because they don't have to worry about that guy. But I think eventually the pass rush will come along. They took Jared Verse, who's more of an edge rusher, in the first round, and then they reunited him with fellow college teammate Braden Fisk. And so those two guys on the defensive line, I think, are going to sort of try to tag team and take over Aaron Donald's pass rushing prowess, but that's a lot to ask for two rookies.
Definitely. And the defense also took a major hit just this past day when Ernest Jones, the captain, inside linebacker for this team, was shipped away because the Rams did not want to meet his contract demands. So even more pressure on this young defense to try to fulfill that hole. The Rams did make some additions on defense, mainly in the secondary. They did major work in the secondary. They acquired former Pro Bowler Tre'Davious White, who's had injuries, kind of shelved his former self, but maybe can regain what he had previously. Darius Williams, who was once on this team. I believe he actually won a Super Bowl with this Rams team. Went to the Jaguars, was back for the Rams. And Cameron Curl, who is a fantastic safety for Washington, gets big money with the Rams. Who else are you looking to on this defense? With these two major losses of Jones and Donald, who else are you looking to step up?
Yeah, I mean, and you mentioned the additions they made in the secondary. Cameron Kitchens, who is also a rookie safety that they drafted, and I think these sort of mid to late round picks to really contribute. And so I think his addition to that secondary is going to be really good. The question for me is at the linebacker position, because I'm actually not really sure who is going to step up for the Rams this year. You mentioned the trade. That is a huge loss to them, in my opinion. They have rookie Elias Neal coming in there, Troy Reader, Omar Spates, right? Who is going to step up at that linebacker position is going to be crucial. Jake Hummel is another guy. And so a lot of names that I'm throwing out, and I'm not sure how many are going to stick. But they do a pretty good job of finding these guys later in the draft, and even undrafted guys, and be solid contributors. Especially they found that a lot in the linebacker position.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Rams, one thing that they have done really well, despite not having a lot of draft picks, is still getting a lot out of their young talent. So I wouldn't be surprised necessarily if they are able to develop these guys on defense, but it's a lot of unknowns. So that's going to be a huge question mark. But luckily for the Rams, one thing that's not a question mark is that offensive theirs, because you got Matthew Stafford once again. We know the kind of quarterback that he is. We know how thorough he is. He makes offenses more dynamic, and it helped majorly that two guys that were late round picks for the Rams have blossomed into stars already. That being running back Kyron Williams, who was a touchdown machine last year, and Puka Nacua, who might have been the story of last season because he was, I believe, a sixth rounder, and he was electric. I mean, Cooper Kupp was dealing with injuries and wasn't really himself. Puka Nacua, even when Kupp was in the lineup, kind of took over that number one role, and he was almost uncoverable. He runs routes so crisp. He's a tough guy. I mean, with these young playmakers, Williams and Nacua, who impressed you more out of the two last season?
It's funny because when you first posed the question, my first thought was Puka Nacua, just because of I think his draft position and the fact that he came in and really immediately was a solid contributor on that team. Sean McVay loved him coming in. He stepped up when Cooper Kupp was injured. So I think the answer is Puka Nacua. However, Kyron Williams is a guy that did not have a great combine. And he came out, and a lot of people just sort of put him to the side. Really running back for the Rams since the Todd Gurley days, and so the fact that this guy, who was another late round pick, was able to step in and be that workhorse back for this team, despite his kind of small frame, I also think was really impressive. But in terms of that question, both of those guys, I mean, the fact that you had two young late round picks contribute in the way those were, I think you just got to tip your hat to the offensive coaching staff.
Yeah, most definitely. Getting the most and developing these players, it was huge. And they, the Rams did their best to add some depth behind them. You're looking at Blake Corum, running back at Michigan. He was, national title winner, of course, but he's a great runner, and he can be a great fit to slot in if Kyron Williams gets hurt, which we saw a little bit of last year. And then, of course, for Matthew Stafford's case, they added Jimmy Garoppolo, who he's been off injured throughout his career. But in a backup role, he can absolutely be reliable, more so than Stephen Bennett, who was embarrassing preseason. But
yeah.
concern for me, is the offensive line. And particularly, with Alaric Jackson being suspended for the first two games, and they have a bunch of young blockers who've had injury histories and not a lot of time to, really prove themselves in the league. Where do you stand on this offensive line? Do you think they can do a good enough job to keep this offense dynamic?
I think they could do a good enough job. I trust the coaching staff, and the offensive line, I think, has been a question mark for the Rams for the past several years, to be honest. Even when they won the Super Bowl, they had Andrew Whitworth at left tackle, and he was obviously a phenomenal piece of that O-line, but it still wasn't an elite group by any means. And so, yes, there's definitely injuries. Overall on offense, injuries are, I think, a concern. Even a guy, Cooper Kupp has had his injuries. Kyron Williams has been banged up. Same with Matt Stafford. Even Puka Nacua, in college, that was kind of his thing. That was the reason he didn't go higher in the draft, was he had a lot of injuries in college. And so the fact that those are also potentially trickling down to the offensive line is definitely a concern. Sean McVay does a really great job of getting these guys that you don't think are that talented, but coaching them up and playing them well, both at the skill positions and on the offensive line. However, it's kind of shown in the past that offense is like a well-oiled machine, and when one of those cogs is missing and or not really up to snuff, like it could be on the offensive line, the whole thing kind of crumbles. And so it's definitely something to watch for this Rams team this year.
Yeah, Sean McVay, there's a reason why they keep stealing Sean McVay's coaching tree, because the way that McVay develops players and his innovation of play calling and getting guys, do more than what is typically asked of them is phenomenal. And that's why you can never really count out the Rams in any season. So looking forward to another season of seeing Stafford air it out to his receivers and see the offense do what they can do. And if this defense steps up, they could be a really good team. All right, so let's move on to the Seattle Seahawks. So the Seattle Seahawks, hold on, just checking those. So last year they barely missed out on the playoffs. They're now in year 3 of the post-Russ era, but now they're also going to be in post-Pete Carroll era. So this is year 1 of that. They're bringing Mike Macdonald over from the Ravens, defensive coordinator last year. How do you think the Mike Macdonald hire fits into his team? Like, what are you looking to see? What do you think Macdonald brings to the table?
Well, I love Macdonald. And he was probably my favorite head coaching hire this offseason. And he's replacing a big name in Pete Carroll. That's for sure. Pete Carroll is a god in Seattle. They absolutely love him there. They love his attitude. And, even when things weren't going so great in Seattle for the Seahawks over the past, 15 plus years, Pete Carroll's attitude and just the way he motivated the players on those teams allowed them to reach high. I mean, we saw that in 1 year and end up making the playoffs. They won the division, and then they win a playoff game, right? And so that attitude is going to be very difficult to duplicate for Mike Macdonald. But I absolutely love the hire because of how great a defensive mind he is. He is, in a way, almost like the Kyle Shanahan of defenses in the NFL right now, in the sense that he is a younger guy that is doing some really crazy things on the defensive side of the football. And so bringing that to Seattle, a team that has a lot of guys that can sort of play multiple positions on that defense, I think is going to be really, really interesting. He's got his work cut out for him in terms of building up that culture, but from a football perspective, I think he's a great hire. And, that culture will build itself as long as they're winning football games.
You make a really good point about that. The Pete Carroll effect will definitely be missed, even if maybe his best days were behind him. He's an old guy, but he sure knows how to get excited for his players and get his players to play hard for him. So that era will definitely be missed. But if one thing holds true is that people were worried about the Seahawks post Russell Wilson, and it's worked out more than fine. And that is partially because they found a diamond in the rough with Geno Smith, thought to be a bust. Now in his 3rd year post Russ, the first year was blown away by how much he surpassed expectations. Then the Seahawks rewarded him with a contract. Now, in his 2nd year, he was, still a good leader for this team, but maybe didn't really take a step up from his year 1. You could say he was a little disappointing. I mean, how would you evaluate where would you say Geno stands now? Like, is he still that bridge guy, or do you think that he brings an element to the Seahawks team that is hard to find in the NFL?
When you think about Geno, right, we almost sort of had a situation like 2 years in a row in the NFL, and a guy that was kind of thought to be sort of a bust. He was sort of passed around a little bit, went to a team, had a great season, and he was given a massive extension. It happened to Geno 2 years ago. It happened to Baker Mayfield last year. We mentioned a guy last week, maybe Sam Darnold. It's going to happen to again. I don't know. We'll see. But yeah, 2 years ago, Geno was fantastic. Like, he was playing himself into being in consideration of definitely a top half quarterback in the league, and maybe even like a borderline top 10 just because of the state of quarterbacking in the NFL. Last year came back down to earth a little bit. Overall on offense, things weren't going so great. Like last year, the Seahawks finished dead last in plays run on offense, right? They ran the least amount of plays on offense last year. And part of the reason for that is we'll talk about the defense. The defense couldn't stop the run, right? So other teams just ran on them. And then on offense, they really couldn't establish a rhythm because they weren't able to run as many plays. I think that's going to change a lot under new offensive coordinator Ryan Grubb, coming from the Washington Huskies, the college team who just made it to the national championship. They run a much more high-powered offense, up-tempo, already in the preseason. I know it's just preseason, but during this preseason, the Seahawks have led the league in plays run on offense. So that would be quite the shift if they could get that going. And I think it'll help Geno a lot because he still is, I think, that really great quarterback. Certainly a top-half quarterback. I think he's able to air it out. And once they're able to establish more of a rhythm offensively this year, I think he's going to be able.
Yeah, there's little doubt that Geno has kind of proven himself in this league. I mean, it's going to be tough because this is now the third straight OC that he's going to have, different OC. He had Canales, who coincidentally also mentored Baker Mayfield. And then he had Greg Olsen, who had made a career out of getting the most out of quarterbacks. So now they're bringing a guy from college. Like, is Geno, like, we're going to really see, is his development over or were coaches getting the most out of him? We'll see on that regard. But one thing that's for sure, if he's got the weapons to work with, starting at running back, Kenneth Walker, third-round pick, I believe. He's lived up to the billing. Like, he's lived up to what he was in college, which was a dynamic, pure runner. And when he's healthy, he's one of the best pure running backs in the game. Then you look at their receiving trio, which the Seahawks always seem to have good receivers, and it's no different this year. You got DK Metcalf, who's a true number one receiver, big body, leader on the offense in terms of setting the tone for a physicality for the game. Tyler Lockett, who's been a mainstay there for quite some time. He's well known for his ability to not get hit and avoid physicality, but does that better than anyone else in the league. And then you have Jackson Smith and Jigba, second-year receiver, who was kind of slow to get onto the scene last year, but overall, we know what kind of talent he is. We know what kind of stats he put in college, so that can make for one of the better trio of receivers in the NFL. Now, we know that they're good on the weapons front, but can that offensive line stay consistent? That could be a huge question. They've got Charles Cross, who's a terrific left tackle, but the rest of the offensive line is questionable. We got young guys who've been good, but injuries and unproven guys. So with all that in mind, the weapons that they have, Geno's career up to this point and what they've got on the offensive line, can this be a dynamic offense this coming year?
But yeah, you mentioned the offensive line. You're kind of getting the theme of this division almost. Like, that is absolutely the question. They brought in George Fant as well. You mentioned Charles Cross. Tackle, I think, is good. I think they've got a good set of tackles. Question is going to be injuries because their guys have dealt with some injuries. The interior is absolutely a question, especially when you think about a guy like Geno Smith, right? Like a guy who is not elite. And then, we could say how good he is, but he is not an elite quarterback. And when you get that pressure up the middle on a guy like that, that's when he starts to panic. That's when he has to scramble out of the pocket. And that's when things sort of break down on offense. And so I think they're going to try to set up the offense to sort of mitigate that as best as possible, getting the ball out quickly to avoid that pressure. But yeah, you mentioned the offensive line. That is, in my opinion, the big thing to watch. Everything else is kind of set in stone. It's up to Geno to, be that really good quarterback that we have seen him be, and we saw him be 2 years ago. But the offensive line is the one part of this that I think you could look at and say, yeah, if that is not up to snuff, everything could fall apart.
Mm-hmm. Yep, another team of offensive line issues in this division. Big theme here. Well, the Seahawks brought in McDonald to, try to put a spark into this defense, which, as you said, struggled to stop the run last year. So what they do in the offseason, well, for starters, that their earliest draft pick was Byron Murphy, defensive tackle. So that's going to be a big addition, as well as Jonathan Hankins, who has been known kind of as like a nose tackle run stuffer. So they definitely tried to make some additions to this defense on the defensive line to make things better. But they also had an injury to Uchenna Nwosu, who's one of their pass rushers. So that's a big hole to fill. Do you think the Seahawks did enough to tackle that big weakness, which was their run defense in the offseason?
So I think they did, in the sense, I don't think it's going to be as bad as it has been. And it has been, really, really bad. I mean, really like a sieve. You could just run right through, like a knife through butter against that defense. Defensive coordinator Aiden Durd, coming over from the Cowboys, and he was the defensive line coach with the Cowboys. So in terms of helping the running game, yes. Their first-round pick, Byron Murphy, I think he's going to be huge for that. Where I think Durd is going to really help coming from the Cowboys is with the pass rush. He is a guy who helped coach up Micah Parsons in Dallas and become that edge rusher, that we know he is in the NFL today. And so they really very clearly tackled that defensive line. I do think it's going to improve to the point where that is not a glaring weakness on that defense. It's still a weakness, but it is not something that teams are going to look at and say, yes, if we just pound the rock, we're going to beat this team. They're going to have to think a little bit more outside the box to beat this defense. Still a defense a little bit devoid of talent, but we mentioned Mike McDonald. Leslie Frazier, the longtime defensive coordinator, is the assistant head coach there in Seattle. And with combining those two with Durd and the a few guys that they have, particularly in the secondary on this defense, I think has the potential to be a special unit this year.
I think that could be a bit bold to say. I mean, they did bring in some, big talented defensive minds to help out coach and get the best of these players. But there is a lot of talent that has to be replaced. I mean, they lost their top 3 linebackers in the offseason, including veteran Bobby Wagner. Now they brought in Jerome Baker to help kind of fill that void, but he's been off injured. Then you got young guys like Tyrell Dodson, Tyrese Knight, who are going to try to fulfill those roles, but they're unproven. So they're a bit shaky. And then at corner, they have a Tariq Woolen, who was incredible 2 years ago, but he didn't really have a great season last year. So sometimes corners in the NFL can come onto the scene, make a name for themselves. Like Josh Norman is an example of a guy who was elite and then kind of fell off the cliff. So it's yet to be seen, if Woolen can return to that form. They do have Devin Witherspoon, of course, who was excellent last year. So we know that he's going to be really good. And then they have Julian Love in that secondary, who was acquired the season before. He was, he's a good player. He's not fantastic by any means, but they're probably going to have to.
He's a Pro Bowler.
Julian Love. Fair enough.
Julian Love. He was a Pro Bowler.
Well, maybe we have different opinions. Then who else was a Pro Bowler? Tyler. Okay, we're getting off topic here anyway.
All right.
So this this secondary, 10 years ago was once known for having the Legion of Boom. They're known for their great secondary. With the guys back here, maybe they're not the Legion of Boom, but can they be competent enough to be one of the better secondaries in the league?
I definitely think they can. I mean, obviously, I do, because I think Julie Love is a very good safety. I do think depth is a huge question mark. You mentioned Tariq Woolen, right? Like, if you could sit there confidently and say like him and Witherspoon are 1 and 2, and they're a really, really great corner duo, then yeah, I think they would have the potential to be a really special secondary. I'm not sure if you could say that about Woolen. Yes, he was fantastic that first year, but his sort of deficiencies from that first year caught up to him last year, and so teams know how to attack him a lot better. Going to be interesting to see, but look, I think they have some great faces in that secondary. I do think depth overall on the defense is a huge question mark for them. I think the linebacker position is a huge question mark. However, I really do trust that defensive coaching staff, and I think they have got really special players like Witherspoon and Love, and I think Byron Murphy, their first round pick, to sort of pick up the slack for some of the other guys.
Mm-hmm. So this Seattle team will be very interesting this year. There's a lot of changes in the coaching staff, a lot of changes in personnel, a lot of young guys coming in. They could be a big swing team. So very interesting to see how their season will go, and we'll again dive into the prediction a little bit. But we got one more team to talk about, and that is the Arizona Cardinals, who kind of had a lost season from the get-go last year because Kyler Murray had a torn ACL late in the 2022 season, and he was going to be out for the first part of the 23 season, which means we had to see a lot of quarterback play, including Clayton Tune. But that's out of the equation this year. Murray's back. He's fully recovered, or at least should be, from that torn ACL. And he's got himself a new toy, Marvin Harrison Jr., who was drafted with the 4th overall pick and immediately gives Kyler Murray a very reliable weapon to work with. Now, we've also had Trey McBride, who stepped up big time late last year, and James Conner, who's been a surprisingly very good running back for this team. So my question to you, do you think that with a fully healthy Kyler now, can we see the kind of offensive production that we saw a few years ago when the Cardinals got off that undefeated start and things tailed off?
I think we can. When he came back last year, maybe for the last few weeks in the season, they had a top 10, or at least close to a top 10 offense for the last final stretch of the season when Murray went back. He showed that he could still be dynamic, and now this is sort of the year after for his injury. And so I think if he can get back to being that dynamic runner, that adds a completely new facet to this offense, or really an old facet that will bring it back to how dynamic he and this offense were. And then you add in Marvin Harrison Jr., who he is a number 1 wide receiver, and they haven't had that since DeAndre Hopkins. And I actually think his relationship with Kyler Murray is going to be really interesting because I think he's going to take on a very Hopkins-esque role in the sense of one of the reasons they brought in DeAndre Hopkins was because he is the best receiver, maybe in NFL history, in when the quarterback gets out of the pocket, right? That is when he is at his best. Kyler Murray, coincidentally, is one of the best quarterbacks in NFL history when outside the pocket. Or I should say he is one of the guys that goes and leaves the pocket, way, probably too often, right? And so I think Harrison Jr. can have a very similar impact. And then you look at the other guys. You mentioned Trey McBride, one of the best young tight ends in the league, really came out at the end of last year, shown that he can be, a number 1 threat on this team, and now he only has to be that number 2 threat. And then you add in a guy like Greg Dortch, who is a very small wide receiver, more of a slot guy, but he can also get down the field. You add him in there, and you're putting together a pretty good group of skill position players.
Yeah, really good skill players, and the potential for a good offensive line. They had Paris Johnson, who was who's got potential to be an excellent blocker in this league. He was pretty good last year. They brought in Jonah Williams, who struggled they moved him to right tackle, and he kind of struggled a bit, but maybe he just needed more time contract this offseason. They like what they see out of him. Interior is a little shaky, but I'd say overall, this is a pretty good unit. I think deep into the guy, or do you think that he's got a lot to prove this season?
Did you see my chat? I didn't get like any of that.
Yeah, I might have blacked out. Okay. Okay, no worries. So let's start over from when. So we know about the offensive line that we've got some good pieces there. We got Paris Johnson, solid. He was drafted in the first round last year. He played very solid last year. He's got great potential to be even better than that. Jonah Williams, who's proven in the past to be good, struggled in a new position at right tackle last year, but he could definitely, maybe need a season to get better. And then you got Froholt at center, who just got a new contract. And then the interior offensive line, which is a little shaky, but can be solid enough to get the job done. So I think the offense is good as a unit. But the question was with Kyler when he got that big contract is he like, does he really have the capability of being that guy, like being that starter that gets their team to the promised land in the NFL? I mean, with what the Cardinals have on offense, do you think this is kind of like a make or break season for Kyler in terms of proving that he is the Cardinals franchise guy?
I think it definitely could be. I mean, look, he has shown that he can be a good quarterback in this league. I don't think there's any doubts about that. But yes, like if he shows that he might be part of the problem in Arizona rather than part of the solution, I could definitely see this sort of new regime. You got to remember, like Kyler is not these guys' quarterbacks, right? The new regime that came in with head coach Jonathan Gannon, right? And Monty Ossenfort, who's the new GM, they've done a really great job with this roster. They have found talent, in these last couple drafts, and they have taken a roster that a lot of people would have described as one of, if not the worst in the league, and brought it back to being what I think of as a competitive roster. And we'll talk about our predictions, but yeah, I think they are a competitive roster. And so there's definitely a chance that people look at Kyler at the end of this year and say, whoa, okay, he's not the guy that's going to take you all the way. And so I do think there is that pressure on him because sort of a reversal of what I think people felt about, this sort of new look Cardinals team a couple years ago, where everyone thought that Kyler was great and that, the guys they were bringing in weren't that great. I think a lot of people weren't sure about Jonathan Gannon and they weren't sure about him as a head coach. Now I think him and Monty Ossenfort are viewed as, hey, these are the guys that are going to take the Cardinals to the right place. Is Kyler going to be a part of it? They've put a lot of great pieces around him. I think Kyler is going to really excel. But yes, if things go very poorly, I think the Cardinals could be sitting there internally saying, we might need to go get ourselves a new quarterback.
Yeah, you make a good point about it wasn't the regime that drafted Kyler. So I definitely think with that being said that, yeah, Kyler's got a lot to prove. But it's not like they didn't go out and get a weapon for him. So I think Kyler's got all the tools that he needs to succeed. The defense, on the other hand, there are some question marks. Now, Jonathan Gannon was brought in here from Philadelphia. He was the former DC there. Now, second year as head coach of this team. And this defense basically was void of talent last year. But Gannon got a lot out of these guys. Got them to play hard, and the Cardinals definitely overperformed on defense. but there still are some issues, particularly with like the line and the pass rush. They got some good production out of Dennis Gardeck last year, who stepped up, got 6.5 sacks, came out of nowhere really, but guys like Zaven Collins and then other guys on that D line didn't really like perform as expected. Do you think that the Cardinals did enough in the offseason to improve this defense to make them more competent?
I think they definitely improved to make them more confident or competent to what you were saying, right? Like they brought in a lot of guys on that defensive line, particularly at the defensive tackle position. So I do think edge rusher is still a question mark for them, right? They drafted Darius Robinson in this last draft, although he is dealing with an injury, and so some concerns about his availability. I think the defensive line in general is going to definitely improve. However, I do still have questions on that, edge rusher position. I think Jonathan Gannon is a really great defensive line. And like you said, last year, he got a lot of these guys to step up. And so I think a lot of people are expecting him to be able to do that again this year, even though they might not have the talent, though they did add some talent in this offseason. There's confidence that Jonathan Gannon is going to know exactly what he's looking for in terms of defensive players and getting them to play up to the level that he's expecting.
Yeah, with one thing that I think has been prevalent throughout this division is there's a lot of question marks on certain positions regarding like talent. Like, are they good enough in this area? Do they have the depth? But the head coaching in this division, at least on paper, because McDonald's is first year, but it's really strong. And I think that these are guys, head coaches that can get the most out of their players. So that's going to make it really interesting to see how we line things up in this division. But before we get to that, take me through a couple of games on the schedule that you are looking forward to with these teams. Just pick a few out.
Yeah, I mean, there weren't that many, like, in particular that stuck out to me for, like, storyline reasons. I will say, like, every game in this division I think is going to be really, really good because I think they all match up really interestingly with each other. And I think in the division there's a lot of, like I'm really curious to see what the 49ers are going to do this year just because, like, they now have kind of a second Super Bowl hangover and they didn't do that great after the first one, right? The Seahawks with a new identity, the Cardinals trying to really bust through the door of this division and say, hey, we are back and we are really good. Seeing how good they are. The interdivision games are great. Obviously, week 1, Rams go to Detroit. Mentioned it last week. That is one of, like, the top 5 games that I watched the most this year. I will also say just like all of these teams will play the AFC East. I think those are all really interesting because they don't get to play each other that often. And I think those teams match up interestingly. In particular, I think the Dolphins matching up with these teams is going to be really, really cool and interesting just because of how the Dolphins run, especially their offense. It's going to be interesting to see how these defenses kind of all different in their own, like, individual ways, how they handle an offense like that.
Mm-hmm. I think you make a good point that, like, looking at, there's not a ton of like big like revenge games or anything like that stick out. I mean, with the 49ers, they have the Super Bowl rematch versus the Chiefs midway through the season, and then the Week 17 game, as mentioned on Monday, versus the Lions. I mean, those games will be big staples. 49ers have a first-place schedule. Everyone's going to be coming after them. So any 49ers game, I mean, the game with the Cowboys, too, can't forget about that rivalry. So that's going to be big. And I'm really looking forward to this Seahawks-Rams game more than any other division matchup because of how they've played in the past. It's always, very physical game. Teams don't like each other. But now, with the Rams' young talent and the Seahawks, new coaching staff, young talent, defense, like, this could be like one of those games that kind of sets the precedence for years to come. So looking forward a lot to that, but I'm looking forward to these predictions for this division because I think you and I are going to have a different order. So I'd like to hear what you got, and I'll be up next.
I think we will definitely have differences. This is the division. So we did the AFC North a while back, and I think that is going to be the closest division. I don't necessarily think this division is going to be like that insanely close. I think my bold prediction for the AFC North was that it'll come down like at least 3 or 4 of the places will come down to the final week of the season. I don't necessarily think it's going to be like that. However, I think the range of outcomes for each of these teams is so wide. Like compared to every division, each team has such an incredible I could see some teams like missing the playoffs completely. I could see them getting into the playoffs, and so I think that's what makes it a really interesting division. I'm not going to lie. I have been like thinking about my order even up until this moment, and that's kind of why I'm stalling, but I'm ready to go. I have the Cardinals at 4. A theme that I took for this is that I'm going to trust who has shown it before in terms of my predictions. Mm-hmm. I really like what the Cardinals have done. I really like what the Cardinals are doing. I just think that while they did look better than on paper last year, I'm going to go more with the fact that I think these other 3 teams and their coaching staffs and their players have shown a bit more in the last couple of years, certainly than the Cardinals have. So I have them at 4. At 3, I have the Seattle Seahawks. Kind of a similar reason. I really like their coaching staff. I really like a lot of their players. They just feel like 1 year away from being really, really good. I think they still need to develop the guys that they have a little bit more. I'm also not entirely sure how much I trust Geno Smith to be the quarterback to play to the level that they need him to be this year. And I do think there are significant holes on defense. I love their coaching staff. I think their defense will be solid, but I think there will be holes that other teams can target, specifically in the linebacking core. In 2, I've got the Rams. I think Sean McVay is one of the best coaches in the league. I think he's honestly only rivaled by the guy in San Francisco. But I think he is going to have this offense going. And I'm also trusting that they are going to stay healthy. I think that's a big thing. The Rams, in my opinion, have a huge range of outcomes because, yes, if injuries catch up to them, I could see their season crumble pretty quickly. But I think they have a great offense, and I think their defense will be solid enough to get them to finish second. And then first, I've got the 49ers. They're the most talented team in this division. Super Bowl hangover be damned. Not really, because I do think it will affect them. But I just think the talent that they have on this team, yes, huge O-line concerns. Like, that is the big thing for me, in my opinion, for the 49ers. The O-line without Trent Williams is a huge question mark. But I trust Shanahan to keep this offense going. And I'm going to trust the immense talent that they have on their roster. And I'm going to put them, once again, winning the division and coming in first place.
Yeah, I think with that order, it's really hard to, disagree with that standing because, of the volatility.
It's a safe order.
It's definitely, it's definitely tough to really rank these teams. So because of the volatility, I'm going to go a little bold with my predictions. And I'm going to start with the Seahawks at 4. And the reason I have the Seahawks at 4 is because as much as they have the talent, like in terms of like the receiving core, the running game, I do worry with Geno having a third different OC. And those past couple of OCs, being really good, like there's a lot of shoes to fill there. And there's also a lot of shoes to fill on this defense. I think there's big concerns with, is the run defense okay? They lost a lot at linebacker. Can they replace that? Is this secondary even all that good? I mean, they brought in a lot of resources to help it, but there's still some holes there. So I think there might just be some growing pains with year one of Mike Macdonald, and there's going to be some questions. If Geno and nearing the end of his contract, what do the Seahawks do? And if they finish with a poor record, we could see them maybe draft a quarterback coming this year. Next, I have the Arizona Cardinals. So the Arizona Cardinals are a bit of a sleeper team for me this year because Kyler is fully healthy, and I truly think that this offense can be very dynamic with Murray at the helm, with his ability, his rushing ability. He's carved himself out a couple of really nice weapons with Harrison and McBride. I think the O-line can be pretty good. They got a good bookend of tackles, and they seem to have some stability up front. I think that's important. And I think Gannon, once you talk about proving himself, I think Gannon has proved that he can get the most out of this defense. So I like the Cardinals at third, and I think they could potentially sneak in for a wild card. It's either them or the Commanders that are going to kind of come in and steal a wild card spot from this already established NFC. Now, so here's the thing. I was actually, leading up to this, I was going to put the Rams as my number one team. I'm a little shaky on it now, but my main point that I'm going to make here is that I think the 49ers are going to take a bit of a step back this season because of the amount, for one, the amount of change that they've had on defense. There's, like I said, a lot of pressure on these star players to carry the load. Whereas before, this roster was so stacked that the star players could do their thing. And, they had their guys next to them. But, injuries, the Greenlaw injury, the departures, and new guys coming in to the system. We've seen this coaching staff be able to coach up players before, but there's questions, and there could be developing weaknesses that we haven't seen before. That second corner spot has been an issue for years, and it's going to continue to be an issue, and it's going to be a point for teams to attack. And then the other thing is this offensive line is legitimately like a concern for me. Especially if Trent Williams doesn't get the deal he wants and decides to hold out for however long, which I don't think it'll be long because let's say things go wrong week one. I think the 49ers will jump right on getting Williams in there. But the rest of the O-line is not that great. Not a lot of big names. The only big name, they invested a second round pick in Aaron Banks, but he has yet to show that he can develop. So it's a lot of question marks there as much as there is talent, and I think people are almost kind of afraid to say it. But I do think, of course, the 49ers will make the playoffs, and at this rate, I think they will win the division. So maybe look at 11-6. And I had the Rams, overtaking them, but man, they just traded their defensive captain. I don't know how to feel about that. Obviously, they wouldn't do such a thing if they didn't have a plan in place. But that front seven, it's going to be kind of like, a makeshift front seven with Donald gone. It's concerning, how they're going to perform in that area. But we do know for the Rams that their offense is going to be dynamic. Dare I say, top 5 in the league with the receivers that they have, the way that the blocking has developed, and of course, what Stafford has done, what they can do with the running game. I wouldn't be surprised if the Rams end up taking number 1, but because they have questions on defense too, and their O-line isn't all that perfect, yeah, the 49ers win this division, but maybe not comfortably this year.
Yeah, I had a feeling you would have the Seahawks last. I think I'm one of the people that's only high on the Seahawks, and part of it I kind of don't want to be because I was high on them last year and they were definitely worse than I thought they would be. I hear what you're saying about the Rams. I really I was kind of in the same way. I wanted to say this is the Rams division. They're absolutely going to overtake. Stafford is going to this is going to kind of be the final year of Stafford's quote unquote prime. He's going to be really, really good. Cup's going to come back. Everything's going to click. But you're right. They've made some questionable moves. No Aaron Donald is a big thing. And I think that's, we'll close with this. My bold prediction is because a lot of people think the way you do about the 49ers. I think my bold prediction is they'll actually win this comfortably. Part of me thinks that we're swaying too much in that direction with the Niners, and that we think they're going to take too much of a step back when they are still a really, really good team. I think Shanahan is a fantastic head coach. I think some of their part of this bold prediction is I would say I think problems would come in the playoffs when they have to play these really good teams, and while they win the division, mostly because the other teams I just don't think are quite up to their level yet. they could run into a team like the Lions, like the Packers, like the Eagles, maybe if the Cowboys get there. And that's where some of the rust, some of the Super Bowl hangover is going to show. But yeah, really tough division. I like what you said about the Cardinals. I really want to believe in them. And I might I think the reason I have them last, and the reason I didn't put them higher, is because I think it's too easy to say that they're the darlings. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say besides maybe the Bears, they are the most improved team in the league heading into this year, and obviously that should make for an exciting campaign for Arizona.
Yeah, and I'll lead right into that with my bold prediction, because one thing that I didn't talk about in terms of major awards was Coach of the Year, and if Arizona gets into the playoffs, I think Jonathan Gannon could definitely be the Coach of the Year. So that's where I'm going to go with it, because of how he's been able to get the most out of his roster, and he's a little known name. And I think, with D'Amico Ryans as an example, they like to give this award to guys who have not established themselves and come out of nowhere and brought a team up from the dead, essentially. So I think Gannon fits that billing, and I wouldn't be surprised if he wins.
Yeah.
All right.
I like that.
Well, this was fun episode, and fun doing this whole thing in the off season. We've had lots of debates, lots of questionable opinions, but at the end of the day, we're getting ready for football season, and once we get towards the start of the season, the games start. We're going to see how things unfold, and it's going to be a lot of fun covering this season. And I definitely look forward to recapping some games and doing some more previews throughout the year.
It's going to be great. I can't wait. Hey, we're a week away. It's all happening. Oh my gosh. This has been so fun, and it's been great to walk through these divisions. Honestly, I think this is going to be such a weird season. I think the past couple seasons have been weird, and I think we're going to get a lot of risers. I think we're going to get a lot of fallers throughout the NFL. But as the rule of thumb, it's probably just going to be the Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes again.
Yeah, unless some crazy injury happens, Mahomes has seemed to do worse supporting cast. So that's true. But maybe we'll have a season like 2017 where Nick Foles and Case Keenum meet in the NFC Championship game, something like that. That would be cool. Let's get some unknowns in there. Lots to look forward to, but Game 1 is now 8 days away, so let's get ready for that. And for now, this is Shoop
and Tion,
and tune in for next time whenever we do one of these videos again. Who knows what it'll be, but it'll be good. All right. Take care, everybody.
Bye, everybody.